When Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house, and bowed down before him to the ground. This was their second prostration, a deeper, more significant bow now that Benjamin was present, fulfilling Joseph's second dream. The quiet rustle of their robes, the soft thud as they knelt, would have been the only sounds. He asked them about their well-being, saying, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" Joseph's questions were direct, revealing his deep concern for his father. His voice, though still controlled, would have held a subtle warmth. They answered, "Your servant our father is in good health, he is still alive." And they bowed their heads down and prostrated themselves. The news of their father's well-being was a comfort to Joseph. Then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." The sight of Benjamin, his full brother, the one he had not seen since he was a small child, was overwhelming. The simple blessing, "God be gracious to you, my son," was a quiet, heartfelt expression of his deep affection and relief. His voice would have been soft, perhaps a little choked with emotion, but still outwardly composed. Now Joseph hurried out, for his heart yearned for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. He entered his chamber and wept there. The emotion was too strong to contain in front of his brothers. He needed a private place, a quiet space, to release the torrent of feelings that seeing Benjamin had unleashed. The sounds of his quiet sobs would have been muffled by the thick walls of his private chamber. Then he washed his face and came out, and he restrained himself, and said, "Serve the bread." He had regained his composure, his outward calm restored. The meal was served. The brothers would have been seated according to their age, from the oldest to the youngest, a detail that must have astonished them, for how could this Egyptian vizier know their birth order? This precise arrangement would have added to their growing sense of unease and wonder. The quiet clinking of pottery, the soft murmurs of servants, the scent of roasted meat and freshly baked bread would have filled the dining hall. Portions were served to them from before him, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. This special favor shown to Benjamin was another test, another subtle manipulation by Joseph. It was designed to see if his brothers would show jealousy or resentment towards Benjamin, as they had once shown towards him. The brothers would have noticed this disparity, their eyes perhaps flickering between Benjamin's overflowing plate and their own. The quiet sounds of eating, the clinking of utensils, would have been punctuated by their unspoken thoughts and observations. So they ate and drank and were merry with him. Despite their initial apprehension, the meal was a success. They were well fed, treated with honor, and their brother Simeon was safe. The atmosphere, though still tinged with mystery, would have lightened. The quiet sounds of conversation, the occasional laughter, would have filled the room. When they had finished their meal, Joseph commanded the steward of his house, saying, "Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. Also put my silver cup, the one from which I drink and in which I practice divination, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his grain money." This was the final, most elaborate part of Joseph's plan, a dramatic and risky maneuver designed to force a decisive confrontation and test his brother's character to its absolute limit. the silver cup, a valuable object, and the mention of divination, a practice common in ancient Egypt, would add a layer of gravity and superstition to the impending discovery. The steward would have carried out these instructions with quiet efficiency, the clinking of the silver cup as it was placed in Benjamin's sack, the rustle of grain, the soft placement of the money, all done in secret, under the watchful, silent eye of Joseph, as the brothers prepared to depart, unknowingly carrying the seeds of their next great trial, a trial that would reveal the true measure of their transformation and the depth of their family bonds. Under the vast and indifferent sky, as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the land, and the dust of their departure swirled gently in the evening air, carrying the faint scent of their recent feast and the lingering mystery of the vizier's intentions, as the long journey back to Canaan began once more, with the quiet hope of a safe return, and the hidden weight of a silver cup that would soon bring their world crashing down around them, forcing them to confront their past and their future, under the watchful, silent favor of Joseph. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, weary shadows across the dusty path as the brothers and their heavily laden donkeys made their way northward, away from the bustling city of Arvais. The air, which had been thick with the smells of the market and the river, was now thinning, carrying only the faint scent of dry earth and distant cooking fires. A quiet relief had settled over them, a fragile peace after the tension of the feast and the strange, probing questions of the Egyptian governor. They had eaten well, perhaps too well, and the rhythmic sway of the donkeys was already lulling some of them into a half-sleep, their heads nodding gently with each step. They imagined the familiar hills of Canaan, the faces of their wives and children, and the anxious gaze of their aging father, Jacob, waiting for their return. Then, a sudden shout pierced the evening air, sharp and insistent, cutting through the murmuring of the caravan. It was the steward, Joseph's trusted servant, riding hard on his horse, kicking up a cloud of dust that billowed behind him like a storm cloud. His voice, usually calm and measured, was now laced with an edge of accusation. The brothers reined in their donkeys, their expression shifting from weary contentment to bewildered concern. What could possibly be wrong now? Had they forgotten something? Left a payment unpaid? The steward drew closer, his horse snorting and pawing the ground, its breath steaming in the cooler evening air. "Why have you repaid good with evil?" the steward demanded, his gaze sweeping over them, lingering on each face as if searching for a telltale sign. His words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. The brothers exchanged confused glances. They had been so careful, so diligent in their dealings, especially after the previous incident with the money in their sacks. They had gone out of their way to be honorable. "Is this not the cup from which my master drinks?" the steward continued, his voice rising slightly. "And with which he practices divination? You have done a wicked thing." The mention of divination would have sent a shiver through them. While not a practice of their own people, they knew that in Egypt, such things were taken very seriously, often associated with powerful magic and the will of the gods. To steal such an item would be an offense of the highest order, an act of sacrilege against a high-ranking official. The brothers, bewildered and indignant, protested immediately. "Why does my lord say such things?" Judah, ever the spokesman, stepped forward, his voice firm despite the growing unease in his stomach. Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Look, the money we found in the mouths of our sacks, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan. How then could we steal silver or gold from your master's house? Their honesty regarding the returned money was their strongest defense, a testament to their integrity. They truly believed they were innocent. Whoever among us is found with it shall die, Judah declared, his voice ringing with conviction, and we also will become my lord's slaves. This was a bold statement, a desperate gamble on their collective innocence. The steward, however, remained impassive, his face a mask of grim determination. "Let it be as you say," he replied, his tone chillingly calm. "However, only the one with whom it is found shall be my slave, and the rest of you shall be innocent." This slight modification of the terms, while seemingly merciful, still held a terrible weight. One of them would be lost, condemned to servitude in a foreign land. With a heavy heart, the brothers quickly unloaded their sacks from the backs of their donkeys, one by one, placing them on the ground. The sun was now a fiery orb on the horizon, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple, but the beauty of the sunset was lost on them. Their minds were racing, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and disbelief. They watched as the steward began his search, starting with the eldest, Reuben, his hands methodically delving into the grain, feeling for any foreign object. The rustle of the straw and the clinking of the pottery jars filled the silence, punctuated only by the nervous breathing of the brothers and the occasional snort from a donkey. He moved from Reuben to Simeon, then Levi, and on down the line, each brother holding his breath as the steward's hand searched through their belongings. The process was agonizingly slow, each passing moment stretching into an eternity. The steward's face remained unreadable, giving no hint of what he might find. The brothers, confident in their innocence, perhaps even a little smug, watched with a growing sense of relief as sack after sack was declared empty. They were almost through. Finally, the steward reached Benjamin, the youngest, the one for whom they had risked so much, the one whose safety was paramount to their father. With a deliberate motion, the steward plunged his hand into Benjamin's sack. There was a moment of silence, a breath held collectively, and then a metallic clink. The steward's hand emerged, holding aloft a gleaming silver cup, its polished surface reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. It was unmistakably the governor's cup, the very one they had seen on his table. A collective gasp escaped the brothers. Their faces, which had been etched with relief moments before, now contorted in horror and despair. It was as if a physical blow had struck them. Benjamin, pale and trembling, looked utterly bewildered, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. How could this be? They had been so careful. They had watched each other. The betrayal, the inexplicable nature of it, was a crushing weight. They knew Benjamin was innocent, yet there it was, undeniable proof, glinting cruelly in the fading light. They tore their clothes, a traditional sign of deep mourning and distress, the sound of ripping fabric echoing starkly in the quiet evening. Their hopes, their fragile peace, their careful plans, all shattered in an instant. The journey home, which had seemed so close, now felt impossibly distant, perhaps forever out of reach. There was no argument left, no protest that could stand against such damning evidence. The steward, his mission accomplished, simply gestured for them to turn back. With heavy hearts and dragging feet, they reloaded their donkeys, the silver cup now secured by the steward. The return journey to Arvais was a silent, somber procession. The earlier relief had evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of dread. Each step back towards the city felt like a step deeper into an inescapable trap. The city lights, which had seemed welcoming on their arrival, now appeared menacing, like the eyes of a predator. They wondered what awaited them, what fate would befall Benjamin, and how they would ever face their father with such news. The thought of Jacob, already broken by the loss of Joseph, now losing Benjamin too, was unbearable. They arrived back at Joseph's house, the grand residence now feeling less like a place of hospitality and more like a court of judgment. Joseph was still there, waiting for them, his expression unreadable. The brothers prostrated themselves before him, their faces in the dust, a gesture of complete submission and desperation. The weight of their situation pressed down on them, heavy and suffocating. "What is this deed that you have done?" Joseph asked, his voice calm, almost detached, yet carrying an undeniable authority that sent shivers down their spines. He knew, of course, what had happened. He had orchestrated it. But he needed them to confront the reality, to understand the gravity of their actions, or rather, the actions they were now implicated in. "Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination?" he added, reinforcing the idea of his power and knowledge, a power that seemed almost supernatural to them. Judah, always the one to speak for the family, slowly rose, his shoulders slumped, his spirit crushed. "What can we say to my lord?" he began, his voice hoarse with despair. "What can we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's slaves, both we and he also with whom the cup was found." He offered no excuses, no attempts at denial. In his mind, this was divine retribution, a punishment for their past sins, perhaps even for what they had done to Joseph all those years ago. The memory of their brother, sold into slavery, would have haunted them, a constant, unspoken burden. But Joseph, still playing the part of the stern Egyptian governor, refused to accept their collective servitude. "Far be it from me to do so," he declared, his voice firm. "The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." This offer, while seemingly merciful, was a cruel twist of the knife. It meant Benjamin, their father's last remaining son from Rachel, the child of his old age, would be left behind. It was an impossible choice, a test of their loyalty, a mirror of the choice they had made so easily with Joseph himself. Judah took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage and resolve he possessed. He stepped forward, closer to Joseph, his eyes pleading, his voice filled with a raw, desperate emotion. "Oh, my lord," he began, "please let your servant speak a word in my lord's ears, and do not be angry with your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself." This opening was carefully chosen, acknowledging Joseph's immense power and authority, a plea for a moment of grace from a man who held their lives in his hands. He needed Joseph to listen, to truly hear the depth of their predicament. He began to recount their story, slowly, deliberately, painting a vivid picture of their aging father, Jacob, and his profound attachment to Benjamin. He spoke of how Jacob had already lost one son, Joseph, and how that loss had left an indelible mark, a wound that had never truly healed. My lord asked his servants, saying, "Have you a father or a brother?" And we said to my lord, "We have an old father, and a young brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother, and his father loves him." Judah's words were carefully chosen, emphasizing Benjamin's unique position, his irreplaceable status in Jacob's heart. He described the agonizing struggle to convince Jacob to let Benjamin come to Egypt, the old man's fear, his reluctance, his heart-wrenching words, "You know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out from me, and I said, 'Surely he has been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since.' If you take this one also from me, and harm befalls him, you will bring my gray hairs down to Sheol in sorrow." Judah's voice trembled slightly as he repeated his father's lament, conveying the depth of Jacob's grief and the precariousness of his emotional state. He was painting a picture not just of Benjamin's importance, but of Jacob's fragility, his utter dependence on this last son. Judah then explained the oath he had taken, the promise he had made to his father. "Now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the boy is not with us, since his life is bound up in the boy's life, it will happen, when he sees that the boy is not with us, that he will die. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father with sorrow to Sheol." He was laying bare the terrible consequence, the inevitable death of their father, if Benjamin did not return. This was not just about Benjamin's freedom, it was about Jacob's very survival. Then, with a final, desperate plea, Judah offered himself as a substitute. "Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a slave to my lord, and let the boy go up with his brothers. For how can I go up to my father if the boy is not with me? Lest I see the evil that would come upon my father." It was an extraordinary offer, a profound act of self-sacrifice. Judah, the one who had suggested selling Joseph into slavery, was now willing to become a slave himself to save his youngest brother and his father. The transformation was complete. The callousness of his youth had been replaced by a deep sense of responsibility and love. As Judah spoke, Joseph, who had maintained his stern composure throughout the entire ordeal, felt an overwhelming surge of emotion. He had watched his brothers, tested them, pushed them to their limits, and now he saw the undeniable proof of their change. Their willingness to protect Benjamin, their collective anguish, and Judah's selfless offer, all confirmed what he had hoped to find. They were no longer the arrogant, jealous brothers who had thrown him into a pit. They had learned, they had suffered, and they had become better men. The years of separation, the pain, the loneliness, all seemed to culminate in this moment, a moment of profound revelation and reconciliation. Joseph could no longer hold back. The carefully constructed facade, the years of playing the powerful Egyptian official, crumbled. He had to be himself, his true self, to his brothers. He had to reveal the truth that had been hidden for so long. His voice, which had been so controlled, now trembled with suppressed emotion. "Make everyone go out from me," he commanded, his voice barely audible, yet firm enough to send his Egyptian servants scurrying from the room. He wanted no witnesses to this intensely personal, deeply emotional reunion. He wanted only his family, his brothers, to share this moment. The servants, accustomed to his authority, quickly obeyed, leaving the brothers alone with the governor. The room, once filled with the hushed presence of attendants, now felt strangely empty, yet charged with an unspoken tension. The brothers, still prostrate or kneeling, looked up, bewildered by this sudden command. What new twist was this? What fresh torment awaited them? They had no idea what was about to unfold. Then, Joseph broke down. He wept loudly and uncontrollably, his body shaking with the force of his emotion. The sound of his weeping filled the room, echoing off the stone walls, a sound so profound and unexpected that it startled his brothers. They had never seen the stern Egyptian governor show such raw emotion. His sobs were so loud that they could be heard even outside the house, reaching the ears of the Pharaoh's household, who would have wondered at the strange sounds emanating from the vizier's residence. When he finally managed to compose himself, his voice still thick with tears, he spoke the words that would change their lives forever, words that would shatter their world and then rebuild it in an instant. "I am Joseph," he choked out, his eyes, red and swollen, fixed on their stunned faces. "Is my father still alive?" The question, so simple, yet so loaded with years of longing and unspoken grief, hung in the air. The brothers were utterly speechless. They stared at him, their minds reeling, trying to process the impossible. The powerful Egyptian governor, the one who had held their fate in his hands, the one they had feared and respected, was their long-lost brother. The shock was immense, a tidal wave of disbelief, guilt, and dawning comprehension. They could not answer him. They were too dismayed, too overwhelmed by his presence, by the sudden, unbelievable revelation. The face they had seen as a stranger, a powerful official, now shifted, and they began to see the faint, familiar lines of the boy they had once known, the boy they had betrayed. The bright, colorful coat, the dreams, the pit, the merchants, all these memories would have flooded their minds, crashing down upon them with the force of a physical blow. Joseph, seeing their stunned silence, their fear, their inability to move or speak, tried to reassure them. He knew the guilt they carried, the burden of their past actions. He knew they would be terrified of his retribution. "Come closer to me, please," he urged, his voice softer now, still tinged with the remnants of his tears. Slowly, hesitantly, they moved forward, their eyes still wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. As they drew nearer, Joseph repeated, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." He didn't shy away from the truth, the painful, undeniable truth of their past. He needed them to acknowledge it, to confront it, but not to be consumed by it. He saw the horror on their faces, the dawning realization of the enormity of their sin. They must have thought he would now exact his revenge, that his years of power had been a patient waiting for this very moment. But then, his tone shifted, softening further, filled with a profound understanding and an astonishing forgiveness. "But now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life." These words, spoken with such conviction, would have been like a balm to their tormented souls. It was not about their wickedness, not about his suffering, but about a larger, divine plan, a purpose beyond their understanding. He was telling them that their actions, however terrible, had been woven into a greater tapestry by God. He continued, explaining the reason for his presence in Egypt, the true purpose behind the years of separation and hardship. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. He was not a victim seeking vengeance, he was an instrument of divine providence, a savior for his family, for his people, and for the entire region. The famine, which had driven them to Egypt, was the very reason for his elevation, for his power. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God, Joseph declared, his voice firm with certainty. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. He was emphasizing that his position, his authority, was not something he had achieved through his own ambition, but through God's hand. He was not just the governor, he was Pharaoh's trusted advisor, the true power behind the throne, responsible for the well-being of the entire nation. He then urged them to return to their father, to bring him the joyous news. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. The invitation was clear, generous, and filled with love. Goshen, a fertile region in the eastern Nile Delta, was known for its rich pastures, perfect for their livestock. It was a place of safety and abundance, a haven from the famine. There I will provide for you, Joseph promised, for there are still 5 years of famine to come, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. He wanted them to see, to truly believe, that it was him, their brother, speaking these words of comfort and provision. He was real, alive, and in a position to save them all. Then Joseph turned to Benjamin, his full brother, the one who shared the same mother, Rachel, the one he had protected with such elaborate care. He threw his arms around Benjamin's neck and wept again, his tears flowing freely, a torrent of relief and affection. Benjamin, still reeling from the shock, wept with him, the 2 brothers embracing after decades of separation, a reunion made even more poignant by the shared memory of their lost mother. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated fraternal love, a bond that had been severed by tragedy and now miraculously restored. Joseph then kissed all his other brothers, one by one, and wept over them. The tears flowed freely, washing away the years of pain, the bitterness, the guilt. It was a powerful, silent act of forgiveness, a physical manifestation of the words he had just spoken. And after that, after the initial shock had begun to recede, and the tears had begun to dry, his brothers finally found their voices. They began to speak with him, to ask questions, to share their stories, to bridge the vast chasm of time and experience that had separated them. The conversation, at first halting and filled with emotion, would have slowly unfolded, a tapestry of shared memories and explanations. The news of Joseph's brother's arrival, and the astonishing revelation of his identity, quickly spread throughout Pharaoh's palace. "Joseph's brothers have come," the whispers would have gone, carrying through the grand halls and courtyards. Pharaoh himself heard the news, and he was pleased. He had a deep respect for Joseph, recognizing his wisdom and his extraordinary administrative abilities. He understood the importance of family, and he would have seen this reunion as a blessing, a strengthening of Joseph's spirit, which would, in turn, benefit Egypt. Pharaoh, with his characteristic generosity and trust in Joseph, immediately sent word to him. "Say to your brothers, do this, load your animals and depart, go to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your households and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land." This was an extraordinary invitation, an offer of not just refuge, but of prosperity and comfort. The fat of the land was a common idiom for the richest, most fertile parts, symbolizing abundance and ease. Pharaoh's generosity continued. "And you, Joseph, are commanded to say, do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father, and come. Do not worry about your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours." The provision of wagons was crucial. It meant their elderly father, their wives, and their young children would not have to endure the arduous journey on foot or by donkey. It was a practical and compassionate gesture, ensuring their comfort and safety. And the reassurance not to worry about their possessions implied that whatever they left behind would be more than compensated for by the richness of their new home in Egypt. So, the sons of Israel, still reeling from the emotional intensity of the reunion, prepared to depart. Joseph, in his role as vizier, gave them provisions for the journey, enough food and supplies to last them until they reached Canaan and returned. He also gave each of them changes of clothes, a gesture of honor and hospitality, a sign of their renewed status. But to Benjamin, his full brother, he gave an even more lavish gift, 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothes. This special favor, while perhaps stirring old memories of the coat of many colors, was now given out of love and a desire to bless, not out of favoritism that caused division. To his father, Jacob, Joseph sent 10 donkeys laden with the best products of Egypt, fine grains, bread, and other provisions for the journey. And 10 female donkeys laden with grain, bread, and food for his father on the way. These were not just practical supplies, they were gifts of immense value, symbols of Joseph's prosperity and his unwavering love for his father. The caravan that would bring Jacob to Egypt would be a grand procession, a testament to the power and wealth of his long-lost son. As they prepared to leave, Joseph gave his brothers one final, earnest instruction. Do not quarrel on the way. He knew their history, their tendency towards conflict and jealousy. He wanted them to travel in peace, to arrive at their father's side united and harmonious, ready to share the joyful news without discord. He understood that the revelation of his identity and the dramatic shift in their fortunes could still stir up old resentments or new anxieties. He wished for them to carry only the good news, not the baggage of their past disagreements. The brothers then left Egypt, their hearts filled with an unbelievable mix of joy, relief, and perhaps still a lingering sense of awe at the miraculous turn of events. The journey back to Canaan, which had been so fraught with dread just days before, was now a journey of immense anticipation. They carried with them not just provisions and gifts, but a story so incredible, so profound, that they wondered how their aging father would ever believe it. The dust of the road, once a symbol of their weary travels, now seemed to shimmer with the promise of a glorious reunion. They rode through the familiar landscapes, past the same landmarks, but everything felt different, transformed by the weight of the news they carried. They finally arrived in the land of Canaan, approaching the familiar tents and pastures where their father Jacob resided. The air would have been filled with the familiar sounds of sheep and goats, the distant barking of dogs, and the quiet rhythm of pastoral life. Jacob, old and frail, would have been sitting perhaps outside his tent, his eyes scanning the horizon as he had done countless times, hoping for their safe return. The sight of the wagons, the lavish gifts, and the sheer number of animals would have immediately caught his attention, signaling something extraordinary. When they reached him, they wasted no time in delivering the astonishing news. "Joseph is still alive," they exclaimed, their voices breathless with excitement and wonder. "And he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." The words tumbled out, a torrent of unbelievable truth. Jacob, however, was stunned. He could not believe them. The shock was too great, the news too far-fetched, too contrary to the grief he had carried for so long. His heart grew faint, for he did not believe them. He had mourned Joseph as dead for decades, the pain a constant companion. To hear such a thing, after so long, was simply beyond his comprehension, beyond his capacity to grasp. But then, they began to recount the full story, slowly, carefully, detailing all the words Joseph had spoken to them, the specific instructions, the invitation from Pharaoh, the wagons, the gifts. They showed him the wagons themselves, the very vehicles Joseph had sent to carry him to Egypt. The sight of these Egyptian wagons, a tangible link to his long-lost son, began to break through the old man's disbelief. The evidence was too strong, the details too precise. The weight of their combined testimony, the sheer joy radiating from his sons, and the concrete proof of the wagons, slowly, gradually, began to penetrate his hardened grief. And as he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. A spark ignited within him, a flicker of hope that had been extinguished for so long. The impossible suddenly became possible. The dead was alive. The lost was found. His heart, which had been faint and heavy, now began to beat with a renewed vigor. The years of sorrow, the deep-seated grief, began to lift, replaced by an overwhelming wave of joy and wonder. "It is enough!" Jacob exclaimed, his voice trembling with emotion, tears streaming down his aged face. "Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." The desire to see his beloved son, to embrace him one last time, became his sole focus, his ultimate goal. The weariness of old age, the burdens of his life, all seemed to fall away in the face of this miraculous news. He was ready to embark on this final journey, to witness this impossible reunion. The thought of seeing Joseph, whom he had mourned for so long, filled him with a profound sense of peace and anticipation, a quiet yearning to behold the face of his son once more, to touch him, to know that he was truly there, alive and well, a ruler in a foreign land. The sun began to set, casting long, gentle shadows over the camp. As Jacob began to prepare for the journey, his heart now light with the promise of seeing his son, his mind drifting into thoughts of the long years of separation, and the incredible providence that had brought them to this moment, a moment of profound grace and unexpected reunion. The news had traveled swiftly through the family encampment, carried by the excited voices of Joseph's brothers, who, despite their earlier weariness from the long journey back from Egypt, now moved with a renewed energy, their faces alight with an emotion that Jacob had not seen in them for many, many years. The air, which had been thick with the dust of their return and the lingering scent of their camels, now seemed to shimmer with a different kind of anticipation, a quiet hum that settled over the tents and the grazing flocks. The sun, as it climbed higher in the sky, cast long, stretching shadows from the rocky outcrops and the sparse acacia trees, painting the landscape in hues of ochre and soft gold, a stark contrast to the deep, almost indigo shadows that had clung to the ground at dawn. Jacob, still somewhat dazed by the incredible turn of events, moved slowly, his aged body feeling the weight of the years, yet his spirit, once heavy with sorrow, now felt as light as a feather caught on a gentle breeze. He had heard the words, "Joseph is still alive," and then, "He is ruler over all the land of Egypt." Each phrase had been like a cool, refreshing drink to a parched soul, slowly seeping into the deep crevices of his grief, filling them with a quiet, unbelievable joy. He had listened as his sons recounted the story, their voices overlapping at times in their eagerness, describing the grand palace, the rich robes, the power Joseph wielded, and the incredible, almost divine wisdom he possessed. They spoke of the chariots, the guards, the vast granaries, and the way Joseph had spoken to them, first sternly, then with a tenderness that had broken through their own hardened hearts. He had seen the wagons, too, the heavy, sturdy vehicles that Joseph had sent, laden with provisions for the journey and gifts for his father. These were not the simple carts of the nomadic shepherds, but robust, well-crafted conveyances, designed for long travel across the desert, pulled by strong oxen. Their wheels, bound with iron, would grind slowly over the uneven terrain, a testament to the engineering skill of the Egyptians. The sight of them, standing quietly in the dusty camp, was a tangible confirmation of the unbelievable tale, a physical bridge between his humble encampment in Canaan and the distant, powerful land of Egypt. The preparations for the journey began in earnest. The women, who had initially been skeptical, their faces etched with the worry of their husband's long absence, now bustled about with a new purpose. They packed their meager belongings, the woven rugs, the clay pots, the grinding stones, the simple tools of their daily lives. The children, sensing the excitement in the air, chased each other between the tents, their laughter echoing off the dry hills, a sound that had been somewhat muted during the long years of famine. The men, under Jacob's quiet direction, began to gather their flocks and herds. This was no small task, for Jacob was a wealthy man, his family grown into a small clan. Sheep and goats, their woolly coats thick with the dust of the land, were rounded up, their bleating and baaing filling the air. The camels, those patient, long-suffering creatures of the desert, were loaded with supplies, their soft, padded feet making little sound as they shifted their weight. Jacob's heart, though filled with joy, also held a quiet apprehension. He was leaving the land of his fathers, the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and himself. It was a momentous decision, one that carried the weight of generations. He remembered the stories of his grandfather Abraham, who had also journeyed to Egypt during a famine, and the difficulties he had encountered there. He remembered the warnings, the subtle unease that often accompanied such migrations. But the call of his son, the son he had mourned for so long, was stronger than any apprehension. He felt a deep, abiding trust in the hand that had guided Joseph, the same hand that had guided him through his own life's trials. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, Jacob offered a quiet prayer. He sought guidance, a confirmation that this path was the right one. And in the stillness of the evening, a voice, gentle and clear, spoke to him in a vision. "Jacob, Jacob," it said. He answered, "Here I am." The voice continued, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." The word settled upon him like a warm blanket, dispelling the last vestiges of his worry. The promise of a great nation, the assurance of God's presence, and the tender detail of Joseph closing his eyes in his final moments, these were comforts beyond measure. With this divine assurance, the final preparations were made with a renewed sense of purpose. The camp stirred early the next morning, before the first rays of the sun had touched the eastern horizon. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the last embers of the night's fires, and the earthy smell of the animals. The women, their faces veiled against the morning chill, helped the children onto the wagons, their small hands clutching their few toys or favored blankets. The men, with practiced efficiency, secured the last of the loads, checking the ropes and the harnesses. The lowing of cattle, the bleating of sheep, and the occasional bray of a donkey mingled with the quiet chatter of the family, a symphony of departure. Jacob, his eyes scanning the familiar landscape one last time, felt a pang of nostalgia, a quiet farewell to the land that had been his home for so long. He climbed slowly into one of the wagons, his sons gathering around him, their faces reflecting a mixture of anticipation and solemnity. The journey was long, perhaps 10 days or more, depending on the pace of the animals and the terrain. They would travel south, following ancient tracks, through the arid lands of the Negev, heading towards the fertile crescent of the Nile Delta. The procession began to move, a slow, deliberate stream of humanity and animals winding its way across the landscape. The dust rose in gentle clouds behind them, marking their passage. The sun, now fully risen, began to warm the air, and the vast, open sky stretched above them, an endless canopy of pale blue. They traveled in a large group, a family unit that numbered 70 souls, not counting the wives of Jacob's sons, or the myriad servants and shepherds who accompanied them, tending to the vast flocks and herds. This was a significant migration, a small nation on the move, carrying with them their history, their hopes, and the divine promises whispered through generations. Day after day, the journey continued. The rhythm of travel settled upon them, the creak of the wagon wheels, the steady plod of the oxen, the soft padding of the camels' feet, the distant calls of the shepherds guiding their flocks. At night, they would make camp, lighting fires for warmth and cooking, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the faces of the travelers. The air would grow cool, and the stars, brilliant and countless in the desert sky, would seem closer, more vivid than in Canaan. Jacob would sit by the fire, watching his family, his heart full, remembering the long years of sorrow, and marveling at the unexpected turn of events. He would listen to the quiet murmur of conversations, the soft lullabies sung to sleeping children, and the distant howl of a jackal, a familiar sound in the wilderness. As they drew closer to the borders of Egypt, the landscape began to change subtly. The arid, rocky terrain gradually gave way to flatter, more fertile ground. The sparse vegetation became a little denser, a little greener. The air, which had been dry and dusty, now carried a hint of moisture, a faint, earthy smell that spoke of water. Jacob sent Judah ahead to announce their arrival to Joseph, to ensure that their son knew they were near, and to receive instructions on where to settle. This was a practical necessity, a gesture of respect for Joseph's position and a careful adherence to the customs of such a powerful land. Finally, the day arrived. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable excitement that rippled through the entire company. They were in the land of Goshen, a fertile region on the eastern edge of the Nile Delta, a place designated by Joseph for his family. The sun was high, its rays glinting off the distant waters of the Nile, a sight unlike anything they had seen in Canaan. The land here was flat, rich with dark, alluvial soil, ready for cultivation. There were signs of life, too, distant villages, fields being worked, the occasional glimpse of an Egyptian farmer. And then, in the distance, a cloud of dust appeared, growing steadily larger, accompanied by the faint rumble of wheels and the rhythmic beat of hooves. It was Joseph, coming to meet them. He had prepared his chariot, a magnificent vehicle, probably crafted from wood and leather, adorned with bronze fittings, pulled by strong, well-trained horses. The sight of it, approaching swiftly across the flat plains, must have been breathtaking for the weary travelers. The guards and attendants who accompanied him would have been dressed in the distinctive linen kilts and elaborate collars of Egyptian officials, their presence a clear indication of Joseph's high status. As the chariot drew closer, Joseph dismounted, his rich robes flowing around him, his face a mixture of profound emotion. He had waited for this moment for so long, perhaps for 22 years, since the day he was sold into slavery. The years had passed, marked by hardship, by imprisonment, by unexpected rise to power, but the image of his father, the old man he had last seen weeping by a well, had remained etched in his memory. And now, here he was, in the flesh. Jacob, seeing his son, the son he had believed lost forever, felt a surge of strength, a renewed vitality course through his aged body. He descended from his wagon, his steps perhaps a little unsteady, but his eyes fixed on Joseph. The reunion was silent at first, a moment suspended in time, filled with the weight of so many unspoken words, so many years of sorrow and longing. Then Joseph embraced his father, holding him close, weeping openly, the tears flowing freely down his face, soaking into his father's simple garment. Jacob, too, wept, his body trembling with emotion, holding on to his son as if he feared he might vanish again. It was a release, a cleansing of years of pent-up grief, a profound moment of love and forgiveness. They remained in that embrace for a long time, the world around them fading into insignificance. The brothers watched, their own hearts stirred by the sight, remembering their own past actions, and the incredible grace that had brought them all to this moment. The servants and guards stood respectfully, witnessing a private, deeply human scene that transcended the boundaries of status and power. The air was still, save for the soft sounds of their weeping and the distant calls of birds. After a time, Joseph gently led his father to his chariot, helping him to be seated. The family then gathered around, their faces reflecting a quiet joy. Joseph spoke to his father, his voice soft with tenderness, assuring him of their welcome, of the good land that awaited them. He then turned to his brothers, giving them instructions, explaining the next steps. He would go and inform Pharaoh of their arrival, and present some of them to the ruler of Egypt. Joseph then went before Pharaoh, as he had promised. He explained that his father and his brothers, with their flocks and herds and all their possessions, had come from the land of Canaan and were now in the land of Goshen. He chose 5 of his brothers, perhaps those who were most articulate, or those who were most suitable for presentation to a king, to accompany him. This was a moment of great importance, a formal introduction to the most powerful man in the known world. Pharaoh, seated on his throne, surrounded by his courtiers and officials, would have been an imposing figure. His regalia, the double crown symbolizing Upper and Lower Egypt, the ceremonial staff, the false beard, and the rich linen garments, would have conveyed an aura of immense power and divine authority. The throne room itself would have been a grand space, perhaps adorned with intricate carvings, painted murals depicting gods and pharaohs, and paved with polished stone. The air might have been scented with incense, and the silence broken only by the rustle of robes and the soft murmur of attendants. Joseph presented his brothers, who bowed low before the Pharaoh, a customary gesture of respect and submission. Pharaoh, a man of keen intellect and practical concerns, asked them, "What is your occupation?" They answered, "Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were." They explained that they had come to sojourn in the land because the famine was severe in Canaan, and there was no pasture for their flocks. They humbly requested permission to dwell in the land of Goshen. Pharaoh, having already been well informed by Joseph, and holding Joseph in high esteem, responded graciously. He said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen. And if you know any among them to be men of special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock." This was a generous offer, not only granting them residence but also offering them positions of responsibility within the royal administration. Goshen, with its rich pastures and proximity to the Nile, was indeed the best part of the land for shepherds. Next, Joseph brought his aged father, Jacob, before Pharaoh. This was a deeply symbolic meeting, a patriarch of a nomadic people standing before the ruler of a great empire. Jacob, his face lined with the wisdom of many years and the trials he had endured, blessed Pharaoh. This act, the elder blessing the younger, the man of God blessing the king, was a subtle assertion of a different kind of authority, a spiritual authority that transcended earthly power. Pharaoh, perhaps intrigued by the old man's presence, asked Jacob, "How old are you?" Jacob answered Pharaoh, his voice likely soft, perhaps a little weary, but imbued with a quiet dignity. The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. He spoke of his life as a pilgrimage, a journey, acknowledging the hardships he had faced, the sorrows that had marked his path. It was a profound and honest reflection, a stark contrast to the opulence of the Pharaoh's court. After speaking, Jacob again blessed Pharaoh, a final gesture of respect and goodwill, before being led away by Joseph. Joseph then settled his father and his brothers in the land of Egypt, in the best part of the land, as Pharaoh had commanded. He gave them a possession in the land of Ramses, which was another name for Goshen, a fertile and productive area well suited for their pastoral lifestyle. He provided them with food, according to their families, ensuring that none lacked for anything. The famine was still severe in the land, not only in Egypt but in all the surrounding countries, and the people were suffering. But Jacob's family, under Joseph's care, was safe and well provided for. The years that followed were a time of relative peace and prosperity for Jacob's family. They dwelt in the land of Goshen, a place of abundant pasture for their flocks and herds. The rich soil of the Nile Delta, watered by the annual inundation of the great river, provided ample sustenance. The air in Goshen was often warm, sometimes humid, carrying the scent of damp earth and growing things, a welcome change from the dry, dusty air of Canaan. They were able to live their lives as shepherds, a familiar and comforting existence, surrounded by the sights and sounds of their animals. Meanwhile, the famine continued to grip the land, and the people of Egypt, and all the surrounding regions, suffered greatly. Joseph, with his foresight and wisdom, continued to manage the crisis. He gathered all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, for the grain which they bought. The people came to him, their pockets empty, their faces gaunt with hunger, pleading for food. Joseph took their money, and in return, he gave them grain from the vast storehouses he had built during the 7 years of plenty. The money flowed into Pharaoh's treasury, consolidating his wealth and power. When the money ran out, the people came to Joseph again, their desperation growing. "Give us bread," they cried. "Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone." Joseph, ever practical and strategic, told them, "Give your livestock, and I will give you bread for your livestock, since your money is gone." So, they brought their livestock to Joseph, horses, flocks of sheep, herds of cattle, and donkeys. In exchange, Joseph supplied them with food for all their livestock for that year. The animals, too, were suffering from the lack of pasture, and this exchange provided a temporary reprieve. The year passed, and still the famine persisted, its grip tightening on the land. The people, having sold their money and their livestock, had nothing left but their bodies and their land. They came to Joseph once more, their voices weak with hunger, their spirits broken. "We cannot hide from my lord that our money is spent, and the herds of livestock are my lord's. There is nothing left for my lord but our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants to Pharaoh. Give us seed, that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become desolate." Joseph listened, his face impassive, understanding the depth of their plight. He knew that desperate times called for desperate measures, and that the long-term survival of the nation depended on a strong, centralized authority. He bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. Every Egyptian sold his field because the famine was so severe upon them. The land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he removed them to cities, from one end of Egypt to the other, consolidating them, perhaps for better distribution of food, or to break their traditional ties to their land and establish a new order. Only the land of the priests did he not buy, for the priests had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived on the allowance which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. This was an ancient custom, a recognition of the special status of the priestly class, who served the gods and maintained the temples, crucial functions in Egyptian society. Then Joseph said to the people, "Behold, I have bought you and your land this day for Pharaoh. Here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And at the harvest you shall give a fifth of the produce to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for the field and for your food and for those in your houses." This was a revolutionary change, transforming the land tenure system of Egypt. The people, once independent landowners, now became tenant farmers, working the land for Pharaoh, and paying a fixed tax of 20% of their produce. The people, relieved to have a means of survival, responded, "You have saved our lives. May we find favor in the sight of my Lord, we will be Pharaoh's servants." And Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, which is still in force to this day, that Pharaoh should have the 5th part, except for the land of the priests alone, which did not become Pharaoh's. This system, a form of state control over agriculture, ensured a steady supply of resources for the crown and provided a measure of stability during times of crisis. It also centralized power in the hands of Pharaoh, making him the ultimate owner of all the land and the provider of all sustenance. So, Israel, which was Jacob's new name, settled in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen. They acquired possessions in it and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. The years passed, and Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. The total length of his life was 147 years. During these years, he saw his family grow, his grandchildren and great-grandchildren thriving in the fertile land. The quiet rhythm of life in Goshen, the familiar sounds of their flocks, the gentle flow of the nearby canals, and the distant murmur of the great Nile became their new normal. He watched Joseph, his beloved son, continue to govern Egypt with wisdom and justice, a testament to the incredible journey he had taken from the pit to the palace. As Jacob felt the approach of his final days, he called for Joseph. The air in his tent, perhaps, was still, carrying the scent of old linen and the faint, sweet smell of herbs. The light filtering through the woven fabric of the tent would have been soft, muted. Joseph came, and Jacob made him promise that he would not bury him in Egypt, but would carry him back to the land of his fathers, to be laid to rest with Abraham and Isaac in the cave of Machpelah. Joseph, with a heavy heart, swore that he would do as his father asked. It was a promise that honored Jacob's deep connection to the covenant land, a quiet reaffirmation of the ancient promises. After this, Jacob fell ill. The news reached Joseph, who immediately took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and went to visit his father. The journey from the administrative center to Goshen would have been swift, perhaps by chariot, the dust rising behind them. The air in the tent where Jacob lay would have been hushed, filled with the quiet presence of those attending to the old patriarch. Jacob, gathering his strength, sat up on his bed to speak to Joseph. He recounted the vision at Luz, where God had appeared to him and blessed him, promising to make him fruitful and multiply him, and to give the land of Canaan to his offspring as an everlasting possession. Then, with a clear mind, Jacob adopted Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, as his own. Now your 2 sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be to me as Reuben and Simeon. This was a significant act, elevating Joseph's sons to the status of full tribal founders, ensuring that Joseph would receive a double portion of the inheritance, a testament to his unique position and his role in saving the family. He spoke of Rachel, Joseph's mother, remembering her death on the journey from Paddan Aram, near Ephrath, which is Bethlehem, a moment of profound sorrow that had shaped his life. As Jacob spoke, he noticed Joseph's 2 sons standing nearby. "Who are these?" he asked, his eyesight perhaps dimming with age. Joseph answered, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here." Jacob, with a gentle gesture, asked Joseph to bring them closer so he might bless them. Joseph brought them near, and Jacob kissed them and embraced them. He said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face again, and behold, God has let me see your offspring also." It was a moment of deep gratitude, a quiet acknowledgement of the unexpected blessings that had graced his later years. Joseph then took his sons from his father's knees and bowed himself with his face to the ground, a gesture of respect and humility. He then placed Ephraim on his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left hand toward Israel's right hand, positioning them for the blessing according to their birth order, with the elder, Manasseh, on Jacob's right, and the younger, Ephraim, on Jacob's left. But Jacob, guided by a deeper insight, stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands intentionally. Manasseh was the firstborn, and custom dictated that the right hand, the hand of greater blessing, should rest upon him. Joseph, seeing this, was displeased, and he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. He said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." Jacob blessed them that day, saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, May God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh." Thus, he put Ephraim before Manasseh, a quiet, prophetic act that foreshadowed the future prominence of the tribe of Ephraim. Jacob then spoke to Joseph, his voice perhaps growing weaker, but his words carrying the weight of his final instructions. "Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to you rather than to your brothers one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow." This was a special inheritance, a testament to Joseph's unique place in his heart and in the family's history. The mention of the Amorite and the sword and bow might refer to some forgotten skirmish or a symbolic claim to the land, a quiet echo of the struggles of his earlier life. After this, Jacob called all his sons together, gathering them around his bed. The tent would have been filled with their presence, the air heavy with the solemnity of the moment. The patriarch, on his deathbed, was about to deliver his final blessings and prophesize words that would shape the destiny of the 12 tribes of Israel. He began to speak, his voice perhaps a low murmur, but each word carrying immense significance, a quiet unveiling of the future, a final testament from the man who had wrestled with God and prevailed. He spoke of Reuben, his firstborn, of Simeon and Levi, of Judah, of Zebulun and Issachar, of Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Joseph, and Benjamin. Each son received a specific blessing, a prophetic word that reflected their character and foretold the future of their descendants. The air was still, save for the soft breathing of the men, and the quiet, steady cadence of Jacob's voice, like a slow, winding river, flowing towards its inevitable end, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of a people, a quiet, ancient story whispering into the stillness of the Egyptian night, a story of family, of promise, and of a divine plan unfolding with the slow, deliberate pace of the desert wind, carrying the scent of distant lands and the echoes of ancient voices, a story that would continue to unfold, generation after generation, under the vast, silent gaze of the stars, as the old man's breath grew fainter, and the final words of his blessing began to fade into the quiet hum of the desert night. The sun, a fiery orb, began its slow descent over the arid landscape, casting long, distorted shadows across the dusty plains of Dothan. The air, which had been thick with the heat of the day, now started to cool, bringing a faint, almost imperceptible whisper of relief. The distant bleating of sheep, a familiar sound in this pastoral land, carried on the gentle breeze, mingling with the rustling of dry grasses and the soft scuff of sandals on the parched earth. Joseph, still reeling from the shock of his brother's betrayal, found himself bound, his wrists chafed by the rough rope, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. He could feel the coarse texture of the rope against his skin, a constant reminder of his sudden, terrifying predicament. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful spectacle that seemed cruelly out of place against the backdrop of his despair. He could hear the low murmur of voices, his brothers' voices, though their words were indistinct, carried away by the vastness of the open country. He imagined them, perhaps, counting their meager profits, or discussing their next move, their faces grim in the fading light. The air grew cooler still, and a shiver, not entirely from the chill, ran down his spine. The scent of dust and dry vegetation filled his nostrils, a smell that would forever be associated with this moment of profound abandonment. He remembered the feel of the pit, the cold, damp earth beneath him, the rough, uneven walls, and the sudden, terrifying darkness when they had lowered him down. Now, he was no longer in the pit, but the feeling of being trapped, of being utterly helpless, lingered. The Midianite traders, men whose faces were etched with the lines of countless journeys across harsh lands, moved with a quiet efficiency. Their camels, beasts of burden accustomed to long treks, shifted restlessly, their soft grunts punctuated by the jingle of their harness bells. These were not the Ishmaelites, as some accounts might suggest, but Midianites, a people known for their trade routes that crisscrossed the ancient Near East, connecting distant lands like Egypt with the Levant. They were merchants, their lives dictated by the flow of goods and the demands of the market. They saw Joseph not as a person, but as an item of value, a commodity to be bought and sold. The transaction had been swift, almost brutal in its simplicity. 20 shekels of silver, a sum that would have bought a few head of sheep, perhaps a small plot of land, or in this case, a young man. The silver coins, likely small, irregularly shaped pieces of metal, would have been weighed on a small scale, a common practice in an era before standardized coinage. Each shekel, a unit of weight, represented a tangible value, a cold, hard measure of Joseph's worth in the eyes of his brothers. He could almost hear the clink of the silver as it exchanged hands, a sound that sealed his fate, separating him from his family, from his home, from everything he had ever known. The journey began as the last vestiges of twilight faded into the deep indigo of night. The stars, countless and brilliant, began to emerge, forming familiar constellations that had guided travelers for millennia. The Midianites, seasoned travelers, knew these celestial maps intimately, navigating by the steady glow of the North Star and the shifting patterns of the heavens. Joseph, bound and led by a rope, walked alongside the camels, his feet kicking up small clouds of dust with each weary step. The ground beneath his sandals was uneven, a mix of compacted earth and loose stones, making each stride a conscious effort. The air grew crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from a distant camp, or perhaps just the lingering smell of the day's heat rising from the earth. He could hear the rhythmic pad of the camels' feet, the soft creak of their burdens, and the occasional low conversation of the traders, their language a guttural mix of Semitic dialects, largely unintelligible to him. He was alone in a crowd, a captive in a caravan, his thoughts a tangled mess of fear, anger, and a profound sense of loss. He wondered about his father, Jacob, and how he would react to his disappearance. He knew the pain his absence would cause, a thought that brought a fresh wave of sorrow. Days blurred into a monotonous rhythm of travel. The sun would rise, hot and relentless, beating down on the caravan. The journey would continue, sometimes for many hours, sometimes with short breaks for rest and water. The landscape shifted slowly, from the relatively fertile plains of Dothan to the more desolate, rocky terrain of the Negev desert, and then further south, towards the ancient land of Egypt. The dust was a constant companion, coating everything in a fine, gritty layer, his clothes, his hair, his skin. He could taste it on his tongue, feel it in his teeth. At night, they would make camp under the vast, silent canopy of stars. A small fire would be lit, its flickering flames providing a meager warmth against the desert chill. The smell of burning dung or dry brush, used for fuel, would hang in the air, a pungent but comforting aroma. Joseph would be given a small portion of food, perhaps some dried dates, a piece of flatbread, or a handful of parched grain, and a sip of water from a goatskin flask. He would lie awake, listening to the crackle of the fire, the distant howl of a jackal, or the soft breathing of the sleeping camels. His mind would drift back to his home, to the green pastures of Hebron, to the familiar faces of his family, and the vibrant colors of his coat, now a distant memory. The journey south was long and arduous, covering hundreds of kilometers. The route they likely took would have followed ancient trade paths, perhaps winding through the Sinai Peninsula, avoiding the most treacherous stretches of the desert while seeking out oases and known water sources. These routes were well established, used by merchants for centuries, connecting the rich agricultural lands of the Nile Valley with the bustling markets of Canaan and Mesopotamia. The Midianites, familiar with every dune and rock formation, moved with a practiced ease, their movements economical and purposeful. As they neared the borders of Egypt, the landscape began to change once more. The arid desert slowly gave way to areas with more vegetation, signs of the proximity of the mighty Nile River, the lifeblood of Egypt. The air grew heavier, more humid, carrying the distinct scent of fertile soil and the faint, sweet smell of growing crops. Joseph could sense the shift, a subtle change in the atmosphere, a hint of the civilization that lay ahead. He had heard tales of Egypt, of its grand cities, its powerful pharaohs, its towering pyramids, and its advanced culture. Now, he was being brought to this legendary land, not as a visitor, but as a slave. The entry into Egypt would have been a controlled process. Ancient Egypt, a powerful and organized state, maintained strict border controls. Caravans would have been stopped at designated checkpoints, likely near fortified settlements, where officials would inspect their goods and collect taxes or tariffs. These officials, dressed in linen kilts and perhaps adorned with simple jewelry, would have moved with an air of authority, their scribes diligently recording every transaction on papyrus scrolls. The air would have been filled with the chatter of different languages, the lowing of cattle, and the general bustle of a busy border crossing. The sight of the Nile River, when they finally reached its banks, must have been overwhelming. After weeks of arid desert, the sheer expanse of water, flowing steadily and majestically, would have been a breathtaking sight. The river, wide and deep, teemed with life, papyrus reeds growing tall along its edges, various birds nesting among them, and the occasional glimpse of a crocodile basking on a muddy bank. The smell of the river, a mix of damp earth, fresh water, and organic matter, was distinct and powerful, a stark contrast to the dry smells of the desert. The journey continued along the river, towards the bustling cities of the Nile Delta. The fields on either side of the river were a vibrant green, cultivated with wheat, barley, and flax, irrigated by the life-giving waters of the Nile. Farmers, their skin tanned by the sun, worked diligently in the fields, their movements rhythmic and practiced. Joseph, observing all this from his captive's perspective, must have felt a strange mix of awe and despair. This was a land of abundance, a land of immense power and wealth, but for him, it represented the end of his freedom. Finally, they arrived in a city, likely one of the major trading hubs in the Delta, perhaps Avaris or Memphis, though the text does not specify. The sheer scale of the city would have been astonishing to a young man from the pastoral lands of Canaan. The narrow, winding streets, thronged with people, animals, and carts, would have been a cacophony of sounds, the shouts of vendors, the braying of donkeys, the clatter of pottery, and the constant hum of human activity. The buildings, made of sun-dried mud bricks, rose several stories high, their flat roofs providing additional living space or storage. The air in the city was thick with the smells of human endeavor, cooking fires, spices from distant lands, the pungent odor of livestock, and the faint, sweet scent of incense burning in temples. Joseph would have been led through this bustling maze, his senses overwhelmed by the sights and sounds of this foreign land. He would have seen Egyptians of all social strata, scribes in their elegant linen, artisans crafting their wares, soldiers in their distinctive kilts, and merchants hawking their goods. Their clothing, their hairstyles, their language, everything was new and unfamiliar. The slave market was a place of stark reality. It was likely an open-air area, perhaps a courtyard or a designated section of the marketplace, where human beings were displayed and sold like any other commodity. The atmosphere would have been tense, a mix of desperation and cold calculation. Joseph would have been made to stand with other captives, perhaps from Nubia to the south, or from other parts of the Levant. Their faces, etched with fear and uncertainty, would have reflected his own feelings. The potential buyers, wealthy Egyptians, would have moved among the captives, inspecting them with a critical eye. They would have looked at their physique, their teeth, their general health, assessing their potential for labor or service. The process was dehumanizing, reducing individuals to mere objects, their past lives and identities stripped away. Joseph, a young man of strong build and likely fair skin, would have been an attractive prospect, suitable for various forms of household service or agricultural labor. It was in this setting that Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, made his appearance. Potiphar was a man of considerable importance in the Egyptian hierarchy. The captain of the guard was a high-ranking official responsible for the security of the pharaoh and his palace, as well as overseeing the royal prison. He would have been a man of wealth and influence, accustomed to commanding respect and obedience. His presence in the slave market would have been noted, his status evident in his fine linen garments and perhaps the retinue of servants or guards accompanying him. Potiphar, observing Joseph, saw something in the young man that appealed to him. Perhaps it was Joseph's bearing, his quiet dignity despite his circumstances, or his evident youth and strength. Whatever it was, Potiphar decided to purchase him. The transaction would have been conducted with the same cold efficiency as Joseph's initial sale. More silver would have exchanged hands, and Joseph's ownership would have transferred from the Midianite traders to this powerful Egyptian official. His fate, once again, was sealed by the clink of metal. Joseph was then taken to Potiphar's house. An Egyptian noble's house was a substantial dwelling, often built around a central courtyard, with multiple rooms for living, sleeping, and entertaining. The walls would have been made of mud brick, plastered and perhaps painted with colorful frescoes depicting scenes of daily life, nature, or religious motifs. The floors would have been covered with mats or woven rugs. The air inside would have been cooler than the outside, offering a welcome respite from the Egyptian sun. The house would have been a hive of activity, filled with servants, slaves, and family members. The sounds of daily life would have permeated the air, the clatter of cooking pots from the kitchen, the murmur of conversations, the soft swish of brooms sweeping the floors, and the distant cries of street vendors. The smells would have been a mix of cooking food, fragrant oils, and perhaps the faint scent of incense used in household rituals. Joseph, stepping into this new environment, would have been acutely aware of his status, a new arrival, a foreign slave in a powerful household. His initial duties would likely have been menial, perhaps cleaning, carrying water, or assisting in the kitchen. He would have had to learn the routines of the household, the unspoken rules, and the expectations of his new master. The language barrier would have been a significant challenge. While some trade languages might have been understood, the intricacies of Egyptian speech would have taken time to master. He would have listened intently, picking up words and phrases, slowly beginning to understand the commands and conversations around him. Despite his circumstances, Joseph applied himself diligently to his tasks. He worked hard, performing his duties with care and attention. He was observant, learning quickly, and demonstrated a remarkable aptitude for whatever he was assigned. His quiet competence and reliability would have been noticed by the other servants and, eventually, by Potiphar himself. The atmosphere in the house, though busy, would have been one of structured order, reflecting the disciplined nature of its owner. The text states that the Lord was with Joseph. This phrase, often repeated in the narrative, is a quiet affirmation of divine presence, a subtle thread woven through his trials. It suggests an inner strength, a resilience that allowed Joseph to endure his hardships without succumbing to despair. It was not a visible manifestation, but rather an unseen support, a guiding hand that allowed him to prosper even in adversity. This unseen presence would have given him a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose even when his world had been turned upside down. Potiphar soon recognized Joseph's exceptional qualities. He saw that Joseph was not just a diligent worker, but also intelligent, trustworthy, and capable. He noticed that everything Joseph touched seemed to prosper, that tasks assigned to him were completed efficiently and effectively. This observation, not necessarily a spiritual one on Potiphar's part, was a practical assessment of Joseph's abilities. Potiphar, a pragmatic man, understood the value of such a capable individual. As a result, Potiphar promoted Joseph. He placed him in charge of his entire household, entrusting him with the management of all his affairs. This was a significant promotion, elevating Joseph from a mere slave to the position of chief steward, a highly responsible role in a wealthy Egyptian household. The chief steward was essentially the manager of the estate, overseeing all the other servants, managing finances, supervising agricultural operations, and ensuring the smooth running of the entire household. This new role brought Joseph into direct contact with Potiphar, requiring him to report on the daily operations and seek guidance on important decisions. He would have learned the intricacies of Egyptian household management, from budgeting and inventory to supervising a large staff and interacting with suppliers and other officials. He would have gained a deep understanding of Egyptian customs, laws, and the social hierarchy, knowledge that would prove invaluable in his later life. The house, under Joseph's careful management, flourished. The biblical text states that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. This blessing manifested in tangible ways, increased prosperity, efficient operations, and a general sense of order and well-being. The fields yielded abundant harvests, the livestock thrived, and the household ran smoothly, all due to Joseph's diligent oversight and the unseen favor that accompanied him. Potiphar, a busy man with many responsibilities, could now trust Joseph implicitly, leaving him to manage everything with confidence. Joseph's appearance is also mentioned. He was described as handsome in form and appearance. In ancient Egypt, physical appearance was often associated with divine favor and status. This description, while seemingly a minor detail, would become significant in the unfolding narrative. It suggests a certain grace and presence that would have been noticeable to those around him, adding to his overall impression of capability and charisma. His features, perhaps reflecting his Semitic heritage, would have stood out in the Egyptian household, yet his competence would have transcended any cultural differences. Life in Potiphar's house continued in this manner for some time, perhaps several years. Joseph, now a young man in his early 20s, had adapted remarkably well to his new life. He had learned the language, understood the customs, and had gained the trust and respect of his master. He had risen from a despised slave to a position of considerable authority and responsibility, a testament to his character and the unseen hand that guided him. He had found a semblance of stability, a routine that, while not freedom, offered a measure of security and purpose. However, this period of relative peace and prosperity was not destined to last. Potiphar's wife, whose name is not given in the biblical text, began to notice Joseph. Her observations were not of his managerial skills or his diligence, but of his physical attractiveness. In ancient Egyptian society, women of high status often had a degree of independence within their households, and their interactions with male servants, while generally regulated, could sometimes lead to complicated situations. She began to cast her eyes upon Joseph, her gaze lingering, her interest growing. This was a slow, subtle development, perhaps at first just a fleeting glance, then a more prolonged look, a quiet observation as he went about his duties. The air in the house, once filled with the mundane sounds of daily life, began to carry a different kind of tension, an unspoken undercurrent that Joseph, perceptive as he was, would have eventually sensed. One day, her intentions became explicit. She approached Joseph directly, her voice low, her words a clear invitation. "Lie with me," she commanded, or perhaps pleaded, depending on her temperament and the specific moment. This was a direct proposition, a blatant demand that put Joseph in an incredibly difficult position. He was a slave, and she was his master's wife, a woman of immense power and influence within the household. To refuse her could have severe consequences, potentially leading to punishment or even death, in a society where a slave's life held little value compared to that of a noble woman. Joseph's response was immediate and firm. He refused her advances, not out of fear of punishment from her, but out of a deeper moral conviction and loyalty to his master. He explained his reasoning carefully, articulating the gravity of her request. He reminded her of the trust Potiphar had placed in him, how his master had entrusted everything into his hands, holding back nothing except his wife. He emphasized the sacredness of this trust, the violation it would represent. He spoke of the immense sin it would be, not just against Potiphar, but against God. This reference to God, a concept that might have been foreign or at least different to an Egyptian noblewoman, revealed the depth of Joseph's faith and his adherence to the moral code he had learned from his father, Jacob. It was a quiet declaration of his principles, a boundary he would not cross, regardless of the personal cost. The air in the room would have been thick with unspoken tension, the silence punctuated only by their hushed voices, the weight of the moment pressing down upon them. Potiphar's wife, however, was not easily deterred. Her desire for Joseph had grown into an obsession, and his repeated rejections only seemed to fuel her determination. She continued to pursue him, day after day, her persistence unwavering. She would speak to him whenever she had the opportunity, trying to persuade him, to wear down his resolve. The atmosphere in the house would have become increasingly uncomfortable for Joseph, a constant source of stress and anxiety. He would have tried to avoid her, to keep his distance, but in a large household where he was the chief steward, complete avoidance would have been impossible. The situation escalated on a particular day when Joseph entered the house to attend to his duties. The text notes that none of the men of the house was there inside. This detail is crucial, suggesting that Potiphar's wife had perhaps orchestrated the absence of other servants, creating an opportunity for a private encounter with Joseph. The house would have been unusually quiet, the typical sounds of daily activity replaced by a heavy silence, a sense of foreboding. She seized the moment. She grabbed hold of his garment, pulling him towards her, reiterating her demand, "Lie with me." Her grip would have been tight, desperate, a final attempt to force his compliance. Joseph, caught off guard but resolute, reacted instinctively. He struggled to free himself, to escape her grasp. The fabric of his outer garment, perhaps a simple tunic or cloak, would have been rough against her hands as he pulled away. In his haste to escape, his garment came off in her hand. He left it behind, a tangible piece of evidence, and fled from the house. He ran, not stopping to retrieve his clothing, his only thought to get away from the compromising situation. The sound of his footsteps echoing in the quiet house, the rush of air as he burst out into the courtyard, these would have been the sounds of his desperate escape. The sun, perhaps high in the sky, would have cast harsh shadows as he ran, his heart pounding in his chest. Potiphar's wife, left alone with Joseph's garment in her hand, was consumed by a mixture of anger, humiliation, and a desire for revenge. Her advances had been rejected, her authority challenged, and her pride wounded. She knew that her position as a noble woman would allow her to twist the narrative, to turn the situation to her advantage. She would not allow herself to be seen as the aggressor, but rather as the victim. She began to scream, her voice piercing the quiet of the house, summoning the household servants. The other servants, hearing her cries, would have rushed to her side, their faces filled with concern and curiosity. She held up Joseph's garment, a silent accusation, and began to weave her tale. She claimed that Joseph, the Hebrew slave whom Potiphar had brought into their house, had come to lie with her, to mock her. She asserted that when she had cried out, he had fled, leaving his garment behind as he ran. Her words would have been carefully chosen, designed to evoke sympathy and outrage from the other servants. The term Hebrew would have been used with a derogatory connotation, emphasizing Joseph's foreignness and his perceived lower status. The servants, loyal to their mistress and accustomed to the power dynamics of the household, would have listened with a mixture of shock and belief. The sight of the garment, a tangible piece of evidence, would have lent credibility to her fabricated story. She kept the garment with her, holding onto it until Potiphar returned home. The hours would have passed slowly, the atmosphere in the house thick with anticipation and whispered conversations. Joseph, having fled, would have been somewhere outside, perhaps hiding, or simply trying to process the sudden turn of events, knowing that his fate hung precariously in the balance. The sun would have continued its slow journey across the sky, casting different patterns of light and shadow through the windows and doorways of the house. When Potiphar finally returned home, perhaps after a long day attending to his duties at the palace or overseeing his estates, he would have been met with a scene of manufactured distress. His wife, still holding Joseph's garment, would have recounted her version of events once more, perhaps with even more dramatic flair, her voice filled with feigned indignation and hurt. She would have repeated her accusation, emphasizing Joseph's supposed audacity and betrayal of trust. Potiphar, hearing his wife's words and seeing the garment, was filled with rage. The captain of the guard, a man accustomed to order and loyalty, would have felt a profound sense of betrayal. The idea that his trusted chief steward, a slave he had elevated to such a position, would dare to assault his wife was an unforgivable offense. In ancient Egypt, the honor of a man's household, and especially his wife, was paramount. Such an act would have been a grave insult, a direct challenge to his authority and his standing in society. His anger would have been cold and swift. He did not question Joseph, did not seek his side of the story. The evidence of the garment and his wife's tearful accusation were enough. He ordered Joseph to be taken and thrown into prison. This was not just any prison, but the prison where the king's prisoners were confined, indicating a royal prison, likely a secure and formidable institution, perhaps even located within the complex of Potiphar's own duties as captain of the guard. It was a place for serious offenders, political prisoners, and those who had incurred the wrath of powerful officials or the Pharaoh himself. The transition from the comfortable, albeit managed, life in Potiphar's house to the harsh realities of a royal prison would have been abrupt and brutal. Joseph, once again, found himself stripped of his status, his freedom, and his reputation. The prison would have been a stark contrast to the relative luxury of Potiphar's home. The walls would have been thick and cold, the air damp and heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale food, and the pervasive odor of fear. The sounds would have been a constant low hum of despair, the clanking of chains, the moans of other prisoners, the gruff voices of the guards, and the distant echoes of the bustling city outside, a world he was now cut off from. He would have been led through dark corridors, perhaps down into subterranean chambers, where light was scarce and the air was heavy. The cell he was placed in would have been small, perhaps shared with other prisoners, its floor hard and unforgiving. There would have been no soft beds, no clean linens, only the rough straw or bare earth. The food would have been meager, a basic ration of bread and water, barely enough to sustain life. The sense of confinement, of being utterly cut off from the outside world, would have been overwhelming. Yet, even in this dire situation, the narrative quietly reaffirms, "But the Lord was with Joseph." This divine presence, though unseen, continued to be his source of strength and resilience. It was not a magical intervention that immediately freed him, but a sustaining force that allowed him to endure, to maintain his integrity, and to find favor even in the most unlikely of places. It was a quiet assurance that he was not truly alone, even in the deepest, darkest confines of the prison. The keeper of the prison, the official in charge of the facility, would have been a stern and disciplined man, accustomed to managing dangerous individuals. His job was to maintain order, prevent escapes, and ensure the security of the king's prisoners. He would have observed Joseph, just as Potiphar had, looking for signs of trouble or compliance. The initial interactions would have been cautious, perhaps even hostile, as Joseph was just another inmate accused of a serious crime. But Joseph, with his quiet dignity and his inherent capabilities, once again began to make an impression. He did not succumb to despair or rebellion. He continued to conduct himself with integrity, even within the confines of the prison. He would have performed any tasks assigned to him, however menial, with the same diligence he had shown in Potiphar's house. His calm demeanor, his willingness to cooperate, and his evident intelligence would have slowly begun to win over the prison keeper. Just as Potiphar had recognized his abilities, so too did the keeper of the prison. He saw that Joseph was different from the other prisoners, that he possessed a unique quality of trustworthiness and competence. He noticed that Joseph managed to bring a semblance of order and efficiency to whatever he was involved in, even within the chaotic environment of a prison. This observation, again, was a practical one, a recognition of Joseph's innate leadership and organizational skills. Consequently, the keeper of the prison placed Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners. This was an extraordinary promotion, giving a prisoner authority over his fellow inmates and even some aspects of the prison's administration. Joseph was entrusted with the responsibility of overseeing the daily routines, distributing food, and managing the various needs of the other prisoners. He became, in effect, the chief steward of the prison, a remarkable parallel to his previous role in Potiphar's house. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was under Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. This phrase reiterates the theme of divine favor, suggesting that Joseph's success was not merely due to his own abilities, but also to an unseen blessing that accompanied his efforts. The prison, under Joseph's care, would have run more smoothly, more efficiently, perhaps even with a greater degree of humanity than before. The other prisoners, seeing his fairness and competence, would have likely respected him, even if they resented his authority. Life in the prison, though still a confinement, became more manageable for Joseph. He had purpose, responsibility, and a degree of influence within his limited world. He was no longer just a nameless inmate, but a figure of authority respected by the keeper and, to some extent, by the other prisoners. The daily rhythms of prison life, the clanging of gates, the distant shouts, the hushed conversations, became his new normal. He would have learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of the prison, understanding the hopes and despair of those around him. It was during this time that two other high-ranking officials of Pharaoh were brought into the same royal prison. These were the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, men who held positions of great trust and intimacy with the Pharaoh. The cupbearer was responsible for serving the Pharaoh's wine, a role that required absolute loyalty as he was often the first line of defense against poisoning. The baker was responsible for preparing the Pharaoh's food, another position of immense trust. Their presence in the prison indicated that they had incurred the Pharaoh's displeasure, perhaps suspected of treason, incompetence, or some other serious offense. They were placed in the custody of the captain of the guard, Potiphar, and consequently, under Joseph's immediate supervision within the prison. Joseph was assigned to attend to them, to serve their needs and ensure their well-being within the prison walls. This was a significant development, as it brought Joseph into direct contact with men who had once been close to the highest power in Egypt, men who held secrets of the court and possessed knowledge of the Pharaoh's inner circle. He would have listened to their conversations, observed their moods, and perhaps, in his quiet way, offered them comfort or advice. After some time, both the chief cupbearer and the chief baker had dreams on the same night. Dreams were considered highly significant in ancient Egypt, often believed to be messages from the gods or omens of future events. Pharaohs themselves often consulted dream interpreters. The two officials, troubled by their dreams, would have discussed them with each other, perhaps trying to decipher their meaning, but finding themselves bewildered by the symbolism. Joseph, observing their distress, approached them. He noticed their downcast faces, their troubled expressions. He asked them, "Why are your faces so sad today?" His question was gentle, empathetic, a sign of his compassionate nature even within the harsh environment of the prison. He was not just their attendant, but someone who genuinely cared about their well-being, a rare quality in such a place. They explained their predicament, telling him that they had each had a dream, and there was no one in the prison to interpret them. In ancient Egypt, dream interpretation was a specialized skill, often practiced by priests or scribes who had studied sacred texts and understood the complex symbolism of the divine realm. The absence of such an interpreter in the prison would have added to their distress, leaving them feeling helpless and without understanding. Joseph, with his quiet confidence, responded, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." This was a bold statement, a declaration of his faith and his belief in God's ability to reveal hidden meanings. It was also an offer of help, an invitation for them to share their burdens with him. He was not claiming to be an interpreter himself, but rather a conduit for divine understanding. The light filtering into their cell, perhaps through a small high window, would have illuminated their faces as they began to recount their strange and vivid dreams, unaware that these visions would soon set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead Joseph from the depths of the prison to the very pinnacle of Egyptian power, a journey guided by the unseen hand of providence, a story of endurance and redemption, unfolding slowly, deliberately, under the watchful eyes of the ancient gods and the silent judgment of the desert. The unseen hand of providence, a story of endurance and redemption, unfolding slowly, deliberately, under the watchful eyes of the ancient gods and the silent judgment of the desert. The days in the prison continued to unfold with a quiet rhythm, each sunrise painting the eastern sky with hues of rose and gold, casting long shadows across the dusty courtyard before fading into the harsh brightness of midday. Joseph, now accustomed to the stone walls and the distant murmur of the city beyond, found a measure of peace in his routine. He attended to his duties, overseeing the other prisoners with a calm efficiency that had earned him the trust of the chief jailer. The air often carried the scent of baking bread from a nearby street, mingling with the earthy smell of the Nile's mud and the faint, ever-present aroma of dust. Sometimes, the distant bleating of goats or the lowing of cattle could be heard, a reminder of the world outside, a world he had once known so intimately. Among the prisoners were two men of particular note, former high officials from Pharaoh's own court. One was the chief cupbearer, the man responsible for tasting Pharaoh's wine and ensuring his safety and pleasure. The other was the chief baker, who prepared the royal bread and pastries. Both had fallen out of favor, perhaps accused of some transgression, and now shared the same fate as Joseph, confined within these very walls. Their faces often bore a troubled look, a deep sadness that spoke of their lost status and uncertain future. Joseph, with his quiet observation, noticed their distress. One morning, as the first light began to filter through the small, high windows, illuminating the motes of dust dancing in the air, Joseph found them looking particularly downcast. Their usual morning greetings were absent, replaced by a heavy silence. He approached them, his voice soft, almost a whisper, so as not to disturb the still morning air. "Why do you look so sad today?" he inquired, his gaze gentle and understanding. The cupbearer sighed, running a hand over his face, a gesture of weariness. The baker shifted uncomfortably, his eyes fixed on the rough stone floor. They explained that they had each had a dream during the night, vivid and unsettling, but there was no one to interpret them. In ancient Egypt, dreams were often considered messages from the gods, portents of the future, and their interpretation was a specialized skill, often belonging to priests or wise men. Here, in the confines of the prison, such expertise was unavailable. Joseph listened patiently, his head tilted slightly, his expression thoughtful. He remembered his own dreams, the ones that had set him on this long and arduous path, dreams that had been misunderstood and resented by his brothers. "Do not interpretations belong to God?" Joseph asked, his voice still low, almost meditative. "Please tell me your dreams." He believed deeply that the ability to understand these hidden messages came from a higher power, not from human cleverness. The cupbearer, perhaps encouraged by Joseph's calm demeanor and the genuine interest in his eyes, began his story. He described his dream in detail, painting a picture with his words. He saw a vine before him, and on the vine were 3 branches. As he watched, the branches budded, blossomed, and then clusters of ripe grapes appeared. In his hand was Pharaoh's cup. He took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and then placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph listened, his eyes half closed, visualizing the scene. The imagery was clear, almost palpable. After a moment of quiet contemplation, he spoke, his voice carrying a note of certainty. "This is the interpretation," he began. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. You will place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer." A flicker of hope, fragile yet undeniable, crossed the cupbearer's face. Joseph then added a request, a quiet plea. "But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Mention me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this prison. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit." He spoke of his unjust imprisonment, not with anger, but with a simple statement of fact, a quiet longing for freedom. Encouraged by this favorable interpretation, the chief baker then stepped forward, eager to share his own dream. He described 3 baskets of white bread on his head. In the uppermost basket, there were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on his head. Joseph listened with the same quiet intensity, his gaze unwavering. The details were different, the images starkly contrasted with the cupbearer's dream. After another moment of silence, Joseph delivered his interpretation, his voice maintaining its even, unhurried tone, though the message itself was grim. "This is the interpretation," he said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree. And the birds will eat your flesh from you." A heavy silence descended upon the small group. The baker's face, which had held a glimmer of hope, now fell, etched with despair. The cupbearer looked away, perhaps uncomfortable with the stark reality of the prediction. Joseph offered no further words, no softening of the blow. He had simply spoken what he believed to be the truth, revealed to him by his God. 3 days later, as the sun climbed high in the sky, casting short, sharp shadows, the predictions came to pass with an unsettling accuracy. It was Pharaoh's birthday, a day of celebration and feasting throughout the land. Pharaoh held a banquet for all his servants, and in their presence he lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. The cupbearer was indeed restored to his position, and he once again placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, just as Joseph had foretold. But the chief baker, as predicted, was hanged. The prison buzzed with the news, a stark reminder of the power of Pharaoh and the mysterious ways of fate. Yet, despite the accuracy of Joseph's interpretations, and despite his earnest plea, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He returned to his life of luxury and service in Pharaoh's palace, and the memory of the young Hebrew man in the prison, who had spoken words of both hope and doom, faded from his mind like a ripple in the Nile. 2 full years passed. The seasons turned, the Nile flooded and receded, and the rhythm of life in Egypt continued. Joseph remained in prison, the stone walls his constant companions, the distant sounds of the city his only connection to the outside world. He continued his duties, his quiet strength undiminished, his hope perhaps a little more subdued but never entirely extinguished. The scent of dust and distant cooking fires remained. Then, one night, Pharaoh himself had 2 dreams. They were vivid, disturbing, and left him deeply troubled upon waking. The first dream, he was standing by the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, its waters flowing serenely. And behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 sleek and fat cows, and they grazed in the reed grass. As he watched, 7 other cows came up after them out of the Nile, ugly and thin, and they stood by the fat cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up, his heart pounding. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. Behold, 7 ears of grain grew on one stalk, plump and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Pharaoh woke again, his mind racing, the images of the dreams lingering like a persistent shadow. The dreams were clearly significant, portending something important, but their meaning remained elusive, a puzzle he could not solve. In the morning, Pharaoh's spirit was troubled. He sent for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. These were the men who were skilled in interpreting omens, reading the stars, and understanding the hidden meanings of the world. They gathered in the grand halls of the palace, their faces serious, their robes rustling softly. Pharaoh recounted his dreams to them, describing every detail, every unsettling image. But none of them could interpret the dreams for Pharaoh. They offered theories, perhaps, or vague predictions, but no clear, convincing explanation that satisfied the king. A sense of unease settled over the court. It was at this moment, with the air thick with royal frustration and the scent of incense, that the chief cupbearer suddenly remembered. The memory, perhaps jogged by the mention of dreams and the king's distress, surfaced from the depths of his mind. He stepped forward, bowing respectfully before Pharaoh. "I remember my faults today," he began, his voice tinged with regret. "When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we each had a dream one night, I and he. And there was with us a young Hebrew man, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man his own interpretation. And as he interpreted for us, so it came to pass. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged." Pharaoh listened intently, his expression shifting from frustration to a glimmer of hope. A Hebrew man in prison with the gift of dream interpretation. This was a possibility, a new avenue to explore. Without hesitation, Pharaoh sent for Joseph. The command rippled through the palace, reaching the captain of the guard, and then the jailer. Suddenly, the quiet routine of Joseph's prison life was shattered. Messengers arrived, their voices urgent, their faces reflecting the importance of their errand. Joseph was quickly brought out of the dungeon. He was shaved, a sign of purification and preparation for appearing before royalty, and given fresh clothes, replacing his worn prison garments. The feel of clean linen against his skin, the fresh air on his newly shaven face, must have been a strange sensation after so long. He was then led through the bustling streets, past the towering pylons and painted walls of Egyptian architecture, towards the Grand Palace, a place of immense power and splendor, a world away from the dusty prison. The sounds of the city, the shouts of vendors, the clatter of chariots, the murmur of the crowds, must have been overwhelming after the quiet monotony of his confinement. He was ushered into Pharaoh's presence, a moment that must have felt surreal, a culmination of years of hardship and waiting. Pharaoh, seated on his throne, a figure of immense authority, looked at the young man standing before him. "I have had a dream," Pharaoh said, his voice deep and resonant, "and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph, standing before the most powerful man in the known world, remained calm. His voice, though respectful, held a quiet dignity. "It is not in me," he replied, humbly deflecting the credit. "God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." He made it clear that the power did not reside within him, but came from a divine source. Pharaoh then recounted his dreams to Joseph, describing the fat and thin cows, the plump and blighted ears of grain, with the same urgency and detail he had used with his own wise men. Joseph listened, his eyes focused, his mind already working, connecting the images, understanding the underlying message. When Pharaoh finished, Joseph spoke, his voice clear and steady. "The dreams of Pharaoh are one," he declared. "God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years, the dreams are 1. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. He continued, explaining the full implications of the dreams. Behold, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. And after them will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will not be known in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And as for the doubling of Pharaoh's dream, it means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. The repetition of the dream, he explained, emphasized its certainty and its imminent arrival. Joseph then offered counsel, not just an interpretation. He suggested a course of action, a practical plan to mitigate the coming disaster. Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. The words hung in the air, clear, logical, and profoundly wise. Pharaoh and all his servants recognized the wisdom in Joseph's counsel. The plan was sound, a path to survival in the face of impending crisis. Pharaoh, turning to his court, asked, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" His question was rhetorical, his gaze already fixed on Joseph. He saw in Joseph not just an interpreter of dreams, but a man of exceptional wisdom and understanding, guided by a divine presence. Then Pharaoh spoke directly to Joseph, his voice filled with authority and conviction. "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." And with those words, Joseph's life was transformed in an instant. From the depths of a prison cell, he was elevated to the second most powerful position in all of Egypt. Pharaoh then took his signet ring from his own hand and put it on Joseph's hand, a symbol of delegated authority, granting him the power to issue decrees in Pharaoh's name. He dressed Joseph in garments of fine linen, the soft, luxurious fabric of royalty, and placed a gold chain around his neck, a mark of high office. He had Joseph ride in his second chariot, a public display of his new status, and heralds went before him, shouting, "Bow the knee." The people of Egypt, accustomed to displays of royal power, would have witnessed this sudden elevation with a mixture of awe and curiosity. Joseph, the Hebrew slave, the prisoner, was now the Grand Vizier of Egypt, responsible for the very survival of the nation. Pharaoh also gave Joseph a new Egyptian name, Zarfunath-Paneah, meaning God speaks and he lives, or sustainer of life, a name that reflected his new role. And he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife. This marriage would have fully integrated Joseph into the highest echelons of Egyptian society, connecting him to powerful priestly families. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. 30 years had passed since he was a boy, tending flocks with his brothers in the fields of Canaan. Joseph then went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout all the land of Egypt, beginning the immense task of preparing for the coming years. The air would have been filled with the sounds of construction, the shouts of laborers, the creak of carts laden with materials. He would have overseen the building of vast storehouses, granaries designed to hold immense quantities of grain, strategically located throughout the land. The sun beat down, day after day, on the bustling activity. The scent of fresh cut wood, drying mud bricks, and the sweat of labor would have been constant companions. During the 7 plentiful years, the land produced in abundance. The Nile, faithful as ever, brought its life-giving waters, and the fields yielded an extraordinary harvest. Joseph gathered all the food of these 7 years, storing it in the cities. He collected grain as the sand of the sea, so much that he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. The granaries swelled, their contents a testament to the land's fertility and Joseph's foresight. The work was relentless, but the purpose was clear: to save Egypt. Before the years of famine came, Joseph had 2 sons by Asnath. He named the firstborn Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." The name reflected a healing, a quiet moving past the pain of his past. The second son he named Ephraim, saying, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." This name spoke of growth and blessing even in a foreign land, a land where he had once suffered greatly. Then, the 7 years of plenty came to an end. The bountiful harvest ceased. The sky, once clear and bright, seemed to hold a different, more ominous hue. The air grew drier, the winds carried more dust. And the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had predicted. The famine was not confined to Egypt, it spread across all the lands, a vast, consuming hunger that gripped the entire region. The fields, once lush and green, became parched and cracked. The sounds of harvesting were replaced by the quiet desperation of empty granaries. When all the land of Egypt began to suffer famine, and the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, Pharaoh directed them to Joseph. "Go to Joseph," he commanded, "what he says to you, do." Joseph held the key to their survival. He opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. The lines of people would have stretched for miles, their faces gaunt, their voices weak with hunger. The air would have been thick with the smell of dust and desperation, mingling with the dry, earthy scent of the stored grain. The famine was severe, pressing heavily upon the land. And people from all lands came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe over all the earth. From the north, from the east, from the south, they came, drawn by the promise of food, a beacon of hope in a world consumed by hunger. The roads leading to Egypt would have been crowded with travelers, their camels and donkeys laden with whatever they could offer in exchange for life-sustaining grain. The sounds of foreign tongues, the rustle of different fabrics, the scent of distant lands, would have filled the air around the granaries. Among those who came were Joseph's own brothers. Jacob, their father, seeing that there was grain in Egypt, had said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another? "Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy for us, so that we may live and not die." The family in Canaan, too, was feeling the grip of the famine. The fields around their tents were barren, the flocks dwindling. The sounds of their children's hungry cries would have spurred Jacob to action. So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. Benjamin, Joseph's full brother, was not sent with them, for Jacob feared that harm might befall him. The journey was long and arduous, across the desert, under the relentless sun. The air would have been hot and dry, filled with the fine grit of sand. They would have traveled in silence for long stretches, each man lost in his own thoughts, the memory of Joseph, perhaps, a distant, uncomfortable echo. When they arrived in Egypt, they came before Joseph, who was the governor of the land, the one who sold to all the people of the land. They did not recognize him. Years had passed. Joseph had grown from a boy into a man, his appearance transformed by Egyptian dress, language, and the weight of his high office. His voice, too, would have been different, perhaps deeper, more authoritative, speaking in Egyptian, which would have been translated by an interpreter. They saw only a powerful Egyptian official. They bowed down before him with their faces to the ground, a gesture of respect and supplication, fulfilling, unknowingly, the dreams Joseph had had so many years ago, dreams that had caused such animosity. Joseph, however, recognized them immediately. The sight of his brothers, older, perhaps a little more weathered by life, brought a rush of memories, a complex mix of emotions. The betrayal, the pit, the long years of separation, the dreams of sheaves bowing down, it all came flooding back. But he kept his identity hidden, his face impassive. He spoke to them harshly, his voice stern, through an interpreter. "Where do you come from?" he demanded. They replied, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." Joseph remembered the dreams he had dreamed of them, and he decided to test them. He accused them of being spies, saying, "You are spies, you have come to see the nakedness of the land." This accusation would have been terrifying for them, a grave charge in a foreign land. They vehemently denied it, explaining, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men, your servants are not spies." They went on to explain their family, hoping to prove their innocence. "Your servants are 12 brothers, we are the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." The mention of the youngest, Benjamin, and the one who is no more, Joseph himself, would have been a poignant moment for Joseph, listening to them speak of his own disappearance. Joseph continued his test. "It is as I said to you, you are spies. By this you shall be tested, by the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." He then put them all together in custody for 3 days. The air in the prison would have been heavy with their fear and uncertainty. The sounds of the other prisoners, the clatter of pots, the distant shouts, would have underscored their predicament. On the 3rd day, Joseph spoke to them again, his voice still firm, but with a hint of something else, perhaps a quiet weariness. "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined in your prison, and let the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words may be verified, and you shall not die." This offer, while still a test, showed a glimmer of mercy. They agreed. And as they spoke among themselves, not knowing that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them, they began to speak of their past transgression. "Indeed, we are guilty concerning our brother," they said to one another, "in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us and we did not listen, therefore is this distress come upon us." Reuben, the eldest, added, "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood." Joseph heard every word, and he turned away from them and wept. The raw emotion, the guilt in their voices, touched him deeply. He quickly composed himself, turning back to them, his face once again impassive. He then took Simeon from among them and bound him before their eyes. Simeon, perhaps one of the more aggressive brothers, was chosen as the hostage. The others were then sent away, their sacks filled with grain, and their money secretly returned to their sacks. The journey back to Canaan would have been filled with anxiety, the weight of Simeon's imprisonment heavy on their minds. The desert wind would have whispered their fears. When they reached their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they recounted all that had happened, the stern official, the accusation of being spies, the demand for Benjamin, and the imprisonment of Simeon. And when they opened their sacks, each man found his money in his sack. Their fear intensified, seeing this strange and inexplicable act. Jacob, hearing all this, was distraught. "You have bereaved me of my children," he cried. "Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All these things are against me." He refused to let Benjamin go, clinging to his youngest son, fearing he would lose him too. The famine, however, grew more severe. The grain they had brought from Egypt was eventually consumed. The empty sacks, the hungry faces of his family, the constant gnawing of hunger, eventually forced Jacob to confront the inevitable. Judah, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward. "Send the boy with me," he pleaded with his father, "and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever." He offered his own life, his own future, as a guarantee for Benjamin's safe return. Jacob, seeing no other choice, finally relented. He instructed his sons to take a gift for the man, a selection of the best fruits of the land, balm and honey, gum and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. And they were to take double the money that had been returned in their sacks, as well as new money for the grain. "May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man," Jacob said, his voice heavy with apprehension, "that he may release to you your other brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved." The air in their camp would have been thick with unspoken fears as they prepared for the journey. So the men took the gift and double the money, and Benjamin with them, and they went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he instructed the steward of his house, "Bring the men into the house, and slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon." The steward did as Joseph commanded, and brought the men into Joseph's house. The brothers were terrified, thinking they were being brought in because of the money found in their sacks. They approached the steward, explaining their discovery, trying to return the money. The steward reassured them. "Peace be to you, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your money." He then brought Simeon out to them. The reunion, though quiet, must have been a relief. They were then given water to wash their feet, and their donkeys were fed. They prepared their gift for Joseph's arrival at noon. The air in the house would have been filled with the scent of spices and cooking meat, a stark contrast to the barrenness of their own land. When Joseph came home, they brought him the gift they had brought into the house and bowed down to him to the ground. He greeted them, his voice calm, and asked, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" They replied, "Your servant our father is well, he is still alive." And they bowed their heads and paid homage. Then Joseph looked up and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. A wave of emotion, deep and powerful, swept over him. "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me?" he asked, his voice softening. "May God be gracious to you, my son." Joseph hurried out, for his heart was deeply stirred by his brother, and he sought a place to weep. He went into his private chamber and wept there. The years of suppressed emotion, the longing for his family, the pain of separation, all found release in that quiet moment. He then washed his face and came out, composing himself once more, and said, "Serve the meal." They ate together, the Egyptians at one table, and the Hebrews at another, for Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews, that being an abomination to Egyptians. Joseph had them seated in order of their age, from the firstborn to the youngest, which astonished the brothers. And Joseph sent portions to them from his own table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. They ate and drank and were merry with him, unaware of the true identity of their host, the man who was testing them, the brother they had betrayed. The sounds of quiet conversation, the clinking of pottery, the rustle of garments, filled the room. The next morning, Joseph commanded his steward, "Fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack, and put my silver cup, my special divining cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, with his money." The steward did as Joseph commanded. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away with their donkeys. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Up, follow the men. And when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you returned evil for good? Why have you stolen my silver cup?'" The steward overtook them and spoke these words to them. The brothers were aghast. "Why does my lord speak such words as these?" they protested. "Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Behold, the money that we found in the mouth of our sacks we brought back to you from the land of Canaan. How then could we steal silver or gold from your lord's house? Whichever of your servants is found with it shall die, and we also will be my lord's slaves." They were so confident in their innocence. The steward replied, "Let it be as you say, though he with whom it is found shall be my slave, and the rest of you shall be innocent." They quickly took down every man his sack to the ground, and every man opened his sack. The steward searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. A gasp, a collective sigh of despair, must have filled the air. They tore their clothes, a sign of deep distress, and every man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. The sounds of their lament, the shuffling of their feet, would have echoed in the dusty streets. Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there. They fell before him to the ground. Joseph, his voice still stern, asked, "What deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination?" Judah, his voice heavy with sorrow, replied, "What shall we say to my lord? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Behold, we are my lord's slaves, both we and he also in whose hand the cup was found." But Joseph said, "Far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my slave. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." This was the ultimate test. Would they abandon Benjamin, the youngest, the most vulnerable, the one Jacob loved so fiercely? Would they repeat the sin of abandoning a brother? Judah stepped forward, his heart heavy, his voice filled with a profound plea. He recounted their father's deep love for Benjamin, his grief over Joseph's disappearance, and his own promise to Jacob. "Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a slave to my lord, and let the boy go up with his brothers. For how can I go up to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father." Judah's words, his willingness to sacrifice himself for his brother and his father, showed a profound change of heart, a growth in character. The air in the room was thick with the weight of his plea. At this, Joseph could no longer control himself. The years of pretense, the carefully maintained facade of the stern Egyptian official, crumbled. He commanded everyone to leave his presence. "Make everyone go out from me," he cried. So no one else was with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept aloud, so loudly that the Egyptians in the house heard it, and Pharaoh's household heard it. The sounds of his deep, cathartic sobs filled the room. "I am Joseph," he finally exclaimed, his voice choked with emotion. "Is my father still alive?" His brothers were too stunned to answer. They were dismayed, terrified, in his presence. The revelation was overwhelming, unbelievable. The powerful Egyptian governor, the one who had tested them, was their long-lost brother, the one they had sold into slavery. The air in the room was electric with shock and disbelief. Joseph, seeing their fear, spoke again, his voice now gentle, reassuring. "Come near to me, please." They came near. "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you a great deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God." He emphasized that his suffering had a divine purpose, a greater plan at work. He was not angry, not seeking revenge, but offering forgiveness and understanding. "He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household, and all that you have, do not come to poverty.' He then fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. After that, his brothers talked with him, a flood of questions, explanations, and shared memories finally released. The sounds of their quiet conversations, their tears, their laughter, filled the room. The news of Joseph's brothers' arrival spread quickly through Pharaoh's palace. "Joseph's brothers have come!" And it pleased Pharaoh and his servants. Pharaoh, too, was generous. "Say to your brothers," he instructed Joseph, "do this, load your animals and go back to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your households and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. And you are commanded to do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father, and come. Have no concern for your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours." So the sons of Israel did so. Joseph gave them wagons, according to the command of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey. To each he gave changes of clothes, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 changes of clothes. To his father he sent 10 donkeys laden with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys laden with grain, bread, and provisions for his father on the journey. He sent them away, and as they departed, he said to them, "Do not quarrel on the way." The desert wind would have carried his words, a gentle warning. They went up from Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. They told him, "Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." Jacob's heart fainted, for he did not believe them. The news was too incredible, too wonderful to be true. He had mourned Joseph for so long, believing him dead. But when they told him all the words that Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. The sight of the Egyptian wagons, the tangible proof, brought a surge of hope and joy. "It is enough!" Israel exclaimed, his voice filled with renewed vigor. "Joseph my son is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." The long years of sorrow, the quiet despair that had settled upon him, began to lift. The thought of seeing his beloved son again, alive and powerful, filled him with a profound sense of peace. The sounds of his family's joyful exclamations, the rustling of their clothes, the distant bleating of their flocks, would have filled the air around him. So Israel took his journey with all that he had. They came to Beersheba, and he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes." The divine assurance, the promise of presence and protection, would have settled Jacob's heart, calming any lingering fears. Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, their little ones, and their wives, in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and came to Egypt, Jacob and all his offspring with him. His sons, and his sons' sons with him, his daughters, and his sons' daughters, all his offspring he brought with him to Egypt. The air would have been filled with the sounds of their journey, the creak of the wagons, the lowing of cattle, the bleating of sheep, the chatter of children, the quiet murmur of adult voices. The scent of dust, of animals, of human presence, would have been constant. Judah was sent ahead to Joseph to point out the way to Goshen. And when they came to the land of Goshen, Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept a long time. The reunion, after so many years of separation, was overwhelming, a moment of profound joy and relief. The sounds of their weeping, the quiet sobs of a father and son reunited, would have been the only sounds in that sacred space. Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, that you are still alive." His life's greatest sorrow had been transformed into his greatest joy. Joseph then went and told Pharaoh, "My father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds and all that they possess, have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen." He brought 5 of his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked them, "What is your occupation?" They replied, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers." They also said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen." Pharaoh, remembering his promise and his gratitude to Joseph, readily agreed. "The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land, let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock." The land of Goshen, a fertile region in the eastern Nile Delta, was ideal for their pastoral lifestyle, separate enough from the main Egyptian population to avoid cultural conflicts, yet close enough for Joseph to care for them. The sounds of their animals, the quiet rustle of the wind through the reeds, would have become their new home's soundtrack. Then Joseph brought Jacob his father and presented him before Pharaoh. Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked Jacob, "How many are the days of the years of your life?" Jacob replied, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning." Jacob then blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. The old patriarch, weary from a life of struggle, found a quiet dignity in this exchange. Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their dependents. The famine continued to grip the land, severe and unrelenting, but in Goshen, under Joseph's care, Jacob's family prospered. The sounds of their growing flocks, the laughter of their children, the quiet murmur of their daily lives, filled the air. The famine was indeed so severe that there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, for the grain that they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money was spent, the people came to Joseph and said, "Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone." Joseph replied, "Give your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock, if your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. He supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. When that year was ended, they came to him the following year and said, "We will not hide from my lord that our money is all spent. And the herds of livestock are my lord's. There is nothing left for my lord except our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we with our land will be servants to Pharaoh. And give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate." So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every Egyptian sold his field, because the famine was severe on them. The land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he made servants of them from one end of Egypt to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived on the allowance that Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their land. Joseph established it as a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it remains to this day that Pharaoh should have the fifth. Only the land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. The sounds of the people working the land, now for Pharaoh, would have been a constant hum across the vast plains. Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen. And they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. The family, now a growing clan, thrived under Joseph's protection, a small island of prosperity in a land recovering from famine. The sounds of their growing numbers, the quiet murmur of their daily lives, the rustle of the wind through the reeds of Goshen, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft lapping of the Nile against its banks, the gentle hum of insects in the warm evening air, the faint scent of drying mud and distant cooking fires, the slow, deliberate rhythm of the river, the quiet breathing of the sleeping world.